Hello, everyone. It's the end of the week, but not the end of the world. So it must be time for V.A.C. Roundtable. And we're up to number 63. And we would like to thank Dale Gieringer of California Normal. When I came to California back in 1993, Dale was well established, was one of the leaders in the California cannabis movement by far. And California Normal has been a leader outright, in my opinion, out in change, enforcing change here in California. I am California centric, so I have concentrated my efforts here for the past 30 years. Of course, Dale's been doing so for longer and has been a guide, sage, as well as keeps us constantly educated via the California Normal listserv. So thank you very much, Dale, for joining us this evening. It's a pleasure and an honor to share this time and space with you. So I'm going to start off with our first question. So the first question is kind of it's a multiple part, depending on how you wish to explain it. But how did you originally come to cannabis? When did you first hear about it, try it? The epiphany became sort of inadvertently your life's work. So there had to be something along the way that triggered it. So how did you come to cannabis?
Okay, well, you have to understand, I'm sort of on the cutting edge of the baby boom. I was born in 1946. And when I was in high school in Cincinnati, Ohio, and a fairly actually stimulating educational environment, nobody that I knew of used or spoke of marijuana. The, I mean, there were a group of people who went outdoors to the parking lot to smoke cigarettes, and that was sort of the main disciplinary problem that the school had with drugs. Then we had Orange Day once a year when we would inject oranges with vodka and consume them at school. But yeah, yes, well, that weak thrills, but anyhow. So basically, I was unaware of marijuana. I learned many years later that there were a couple of my classmates who did smoke marijuana with some beatnik types off campus. But anyhow, like most people who went to college then, my freshman year, again, my freshman year in college was 1964, and you didn't hear about cannabis. But in 1966 and 67, you had the Summer of Love, and you had the Beatles, and you had the Rolling Stones all of a sudden coming out. And I think particularly Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And all of a sudden there was this huge buzz about marijuana, and everybody was interested in it. And I was interested in it too. I had actually enjoyed drinking beer in my, mainly beer and some wine in my youth, and thought, why not try something new? And I did on Thanksgiving when I was 20 years old. And I'm sort of glad I waited that long, actually. I didn't terribly enjoy it the first time. It kept me up all night with these dreams of and visions of like Bugs Bunny cartoons were just going through my head all the time. And it didn't have any, I couldn't relate to it at all. It was rather irritating, and I couldn't get to sleep. But the next time I came across it was in the form of hashish, and listened to, I think it was Magical Mystery Tour at that point by the Beatles, and really found a whole new dimension of listening to music, basically, and became infatuated with it. Uh, in fact, some of the pot we smoked back then was, I think, strong as anything that's out there today. Um, the black tar hashish that was circulating freely in the summer of, I think it was 67 or so, when I was in the Boston area at that time, was really hallucinogenic. You got visions off of it. I later learned that black tar hashish probably was opiated. So anyhow, I haven't done anything like that since, or anything stronger than that since. But that's how I came to cannabis. I came to the cannabis movement rather later, really in 1986, when by which time I had moved to California and was going to graduate school and did dissertation work on FDA drug regulation, as it happens. And this is pharmaceutical drugs, drug approval, and it had nothing to do with psychoactive drugs. I specifically didn't look at that, but I looked at FDA drug regulation in general and sort of made the case that consumers should have free choice and access to experimental drugs and new drugs with appropriate informed consent and information. So I was big on consumer information as the key to and not prohibition. And I saw, I happened to hear at that time about the Oregon was having a marijuana initiative, decrim initiative, in 1986 against very strong odds, because 1986 was sort of the beginning of the drug war terror. If you recall, the crack epidemic had just broken out, and unfortunately the poor Oregonians had decided to put a decrim measure on the ballot that year. Unfortunate choice, but they held a conference in Portland. And I thought, well, gee, I'd like to go up and just see the conference. And NORML was a co-sponsor of the conference. And I had heard of NORML before, but I hadn't been active or anything in that movement. But I went to the conference, met Kevin Zeese, who was then the outgoing director of NORML, a bunch of other fascinating, Doug McVeigh, Alan Silver, the attorney, John Swirling, was really impressed by what I heard there and was all charged up. And when I returned to California and having gotten on the NORML mailing list, the next thing that came my way was a letter notifying me that California NORML, the California chapter, needed a new executive director because the current one was sort of retiring, and the entire NORML and the entire drug reform movement were really at an extremely low ebb then. And I had enough money on the side that I didn't have to depend on the like $700 that were left in the bank account of California NORML. I decided that my credentials on the drug issue were pretty good from my work on FDA, and also an investigative article I had done on the DEA for Reason Magazine, which is another story. But anyhow, so I basically got involved in California NORML in January 1987, and within the week that I took over, there was this fantastic train collision in Baltimore. I think it was where a Conrail train crashed into an Amtrak train, killed all sorts of people, and it was alleged that the conductor of and the engineer of the guilty Conrail train had smoked marijuana, as verified by the fact that they were found to have it in their urine, and urine testing was still in an experimental phase. set off an entire um, hysteria about drug use and about drug testing, and led to the Reagan administration requiring random mandatory drug testing of all the transportation workers. And I was totally incensed by this whole thing, because I actually understood how drug urine testing worked, and I understood that this had really nothing to do with impairment at the time. And in fact, the investigators of that accident, the Conrail Amtrak accident, when they investigated, they came up with all sorts of recommendations for safety improvements. Like, for example, there were automatic braking systems that they didn't have installed. There were safety devices that they had actually disabled, and yada, yada, yada. They did not even mention drug testing as a recommended solution, but the stampede was underway in Congress, and they did it anyway. And I vowed that something had to be done about it, which we finally succeeded in doing last year in California. And I am very proud of that. That's sort of been my holy grail, was to try to put an end to urine testing. So anyhow, I took that story longer, but that's my involvement.
Well, there is no time frame, and that was absolutely wonderful and eloquent breakdown of the different instances of your entries and entry points. I think they are significant, and that's a great thing about our forum. You can answer it how long-winded as you want to, because I'm a very verbose son of a bitch. So, I am not afraid to use my cunning linguist as well as expand vernaculars accordingly. So don't feel challenged by giving long answers. That's what it's for. So we appreciate you coming and being here and sharing that with us, because yeah, that's again, a lot of things. I've been around you for many decades, but a lot of those things I didn't know. So this is part of why we do what we do, is trying to get it to know each other and let the movement know, because we're having these discussions with people who we have great respect for, those people who have actually guided the movement, who have and continue to shape it. So you are one of those. So again, we can't thank you enough for sharing the time and space with us. So the next question will go to Council Member Wade Laughter. Council Member Laughter.
Yeah, to echo what Etienne just said, thank you, Dale, for joining us here. And it's fascinating to me when someone like yourself tries to tell your story. There's so much that gets left out. And so the question that I wanted to hear you talk about is, of the more or less 16 initiatives to legalize cannabis in California in your work with CANORML, was there one that, was your favorite? Like maybe you really wished that one had been the one that had come through as versus what we got today? Anyway, love to hear your thoughts on that one.
Well,
Cheers.
that's sort of an obvious question. Prop 215 just changed the entire environment, changed the world as we knew it. I was just really fortunate to fall in with Dennis Perrone at the right place and the right time. And I could see that this was something that would work, because we've been pushing our heads against the wall for a long time, trying to totally legalize cannabis. And, Jack Herer had his famous initiative out there, which actually sort of he started that push right after the Oregon initiative of '86 that I was mentioning, where he had, sort of the hippies' dream of hemp, the hempster's dream, the hemp for food, fiber, fuel, and everything else in a totally ambitious and utopian proposal that was unfortunately totally unsellable to the public. And I had actually pounded the streets a little bit for that, sort of embarrassed because I knew it wasn't going to work. And in fact, I did the Rock Ridge BART station. I don't know if you know, the Rock Ridge BART station is like one of the busiest stations in the East Bay. It was right in my neighborhood. And I would collect maybe 2 or 3 signatures an hour. Whole train loads would empty and people would avoid me like the plague. But, you know, Dennis Perone had the genius to just try for the medical. And, you know, we instantly sensed that that was, you know, that had some potential. And of course, as a Dennis's first campaign, and the first campaign that I got involved in that was successful was the 1991 Proposition S in San Francisco, the Proposition P, excuse me, there was a Proposition S also. Proposition P, the medical marijuana initiative in San Francisco of 1991. And this, again, we were still at the height of the Bush drug war then, and it was almost impossible to say anything good about marijuana or drugs anywhere. But we sort of found that we thought we had this soft spot, especially in San Francisco, and especially going medical. And lo and behold, Prop P got more votes than anything else on the ballot, including a measure sponsored by the ACLU endorsing freedom of speech or something like that. We got 80% of the vote, and we saw 80% of the vote. As Dennis said at the time, you know, 60% of the vote, you know, people will say 60% of the people in San Francisco are crazy, but 80% of the people aren't crazy. And that turned out to be the truth. And, you know, we paraded the idea around the state. Activists took it up in other parts. You know, in Santa Cruz passed its own measure the next year. And we got city councils in places, rather conservative places like San Diego and San Jose endorsed the whole idea. We got some bills to state legislature, which were fortunately vetoed by Governor Wilson because the bills were not as good as what we ended up writing in the form of Prop 215. And we had such excellent reception from the press to this whole story of medical marijuana, which really wasn't that widely known until Dennis started publicizing it at his San Francisco Buyers Club. It was fascinating with press. We got almost universally positive reviews, and I knew that, you know, this was something that we could win. And of course, the key to Prop 215 was making it legal not only for people to use marijuana for medicine, but to grow their own. And this opened up a legal door that had been closed ever since in the United States since 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act, but actually in California, it had been illegal since 1913 to have anything to do with marijuana. So all of a sudden now there was such a thing as legal homegrown marijuana, and that revolutionized everything to an extent I really couldn't envision. I remember when it passed, it felt like I had no notion what was coming next. It felt like, you know, a giant meteor had hit the earth and there was this enormous cloud of consequences that had been shot up into the atmosphere and which would take years and years to change the planet, which it seems to have done. And to see the profusion of medical marijuana dispensaries or cannabis buyers clubs, they were called, and to see how many people actually made use of Prop 215, because when we put it on the ballot, you know, I'd been getting calls at the CANORML hotline for somewhat long before then from patients who were using medical marijuana on their own, had discovered it, and were interested in trying to get it legally, and which was I'd have to tell him, well, I'm sorry, it's, not possible at the present time, would like to do it. But it was my impression that I was dealing with like a small percentage of the users, like maybe 1% or something like that. But as soon as Prop 215 passed, all of a sudden, all of these people who I had known for years as pot smokers, that I thought of just like myself, a recreational pot smoker, all of a sudden were coming up with medical reasons that they could get validated by sympathetic doctors like my friend Dr. Todd Micarea. And we had, first that there were 10,000 members of Dennis Peron's original San Francisco Buyers Club. And then, the count of users went from the tens of thousands up to the hundreds of thousands. And I think by the 2010 or so, we probably had over 1 million medical marijuana users of one sort or another. It was really like 40% of all of the users in California at the time. So I never saw it coming, but it was a great success. And frankly, I sort of look back on the days when we were under Prop 215. I think things have really gone downhill in many respects since we implemented the very complicated and expensive regulatory system that we did in 2016, and which we now labor under. But yes, and then, as you know, Prop 215 got picked up by a dozen other states, and now there's 30 countries in the world, I believe. I think 35 countries now recognize medical marijuana, and it all started here in California.
Thank you, Dale. One of my favorite things about Prop 215 was that it was more or less 750 words. And look at all the
Amen.
things that happened as a result. Blessings.
That was the genius of what y'all created, was the simplicity. And that was also the nightmare for those in opposition. It was also too hard to pigeonhole in any way, shape, or form because of its fluidity of language and what it allowed to transpire, which I agree with you was definitely one of the more epic times in California.
Well,
and it was a very
I think
sustainable system. Yeah.
one of the unique things about Prop 215 was basically it, in those few words, it just created a right to drugs. And that was completely foreign to the entire system of government, of drug regulation that the government had instituted in the last 100 years now, where, every drug has to be approved by a government agency, and and can only be used in certain circumstances by certain people, and, possession, illegal cultivation, illegal transportation, yada, yada, yada. They're all illegal. And unless the government gives you permission, it's, you can't do it. And as I say, Prop 215 drove the truck through that.
It was a joint that sparked the world, literally and figuratively, because it is, it opened up the floodgates. But thank you for your hard work and dedication to and through that. It was without your leadership, I'm not sure necessarily everything would have happened the way that it would have. And I'm thankful that there were stewards like you along the way to help guide it and make sure it not only became a reality, but it was also, fostered well. Next up will be Mary Lynn Mathery will be our next questionnaire. Mary Lynn.
Hey, Dan.
Hi, Mary Lynn.
Good to see you. When you were just saying that, it reminded me, before I get to the question, that when Prop 215 passed, Virginia legislators got all up in arms. And we had an old bill back when they were doing medical cannabis through the IND program. And we had one for allowing it for glaucoma and cancer. And they were like, let's get busy. We got to rescind this law and show people that you can't have people deciding what's medicine. And so we had to fight, just say, don't rescind it, make it better, but don't rescind it. And eventually, hey, we're legal finally. Anyway, you mentioned so many icons already, so you might be repeating some of this, but who are your top 3 cannabis activists that you've worked with over the years? Dead or alive? They might have passed already.
Well, they have. No, they haven't all, but one certainly has. Dennis Perrone he was really the person who made Prop 215 in the medical marijuana movement. He was a terrific salesman and a terrific spokesperson and a community organizer as well. So I can't say enough about Dennis Perrone. I would also mention Keith Stroup, who is actually still around, and he is the director of NORML. He wasn't actually, he founded NORML, and that was a big deal. It made marijuana an issue. And with a consumer group speaking for it, and of course, NORML helped file the first rescheduling petition for marijuana over 50 years ago. Of course, Keith is still around. When I actually joined NORML in '87, he was away doing other things. He took a leave, but he's back now, and he deserves a lot of credit for making the marijuana issue what it is. You know, I have to mention my friend, late friend, Dr. Todd Miccaria as well, the medical marijuana expert. Because when I met him when I first got involved in California NORML, he was on the steering committee, and hadn't heard of him before, but I had gotten involved in NORML because I believed in marijuana legalization and life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness type of thing. But the medicine thing was not really my interest at all, although I'd heard that there were some rumors about it being useful for cancer and glaucoma at the time, but that was I thought a secondary issue. Todd came and started acquainting me with all of what he had discovered and found about the long medical history of marijuana, which in this book, Marijuana Medical Papers, which I always keep handy, going back to the 19th century, documenting all this knowledge about medical marijuana that had been lost. And that was a real inspiration. Plus, of course, Todd Miccaria helped baptize thousands of patients so that they could go to Dennis Perrone's San Francisco Buyers Club, for example, and buy their medicine there. He was a very courageous, that he had gumption about, he stepped where other doctors were feared to tread, and was quite successful with it. So I have to mention Todd, and that's 3, but I would also just mention on the side Ethan Nadelman, who was just key to making Prop 215 happening, in lining up the support of George Soros and other millionaires whose support was essential to the cause. Ethan, who is such a very articulate man, and who was able to help carry the medical marijuana thing beyond California through his organization, which went through various names, Linda Smith Center, and then the Drug Policy Alliance and so forth. And there have been others, but I will stop there.
You don't have to stop there. It's just kind of a number. So continue.
Well, actually, you know who I should mention also, since I don't have to stop there, of course, is Jack Herer, right?
Right. We all met around due to him. I mean, let's be honest.
The thing Jack did, you know, I think everybody realized he was sort of overly ambitious with his hemp initiatives and everything else. But by popularizing the whole hemp issue, which he did with that, and The Emperor Wears No Clothes, which first appeared as a newspaper for support of the Oregon Marijuana Initiative, and then evolved into a book and, you know, umpteen subsequent editions, really did a tremendous favor to the movement in making the movement respectable again. Because when you go back to 1986 and 87, it was, drugs, marijuana was like a taboo subject. And it certainly was not cool amongst, the social movements of the time. The environmental movement, for example, was very, there were a lot of clean living, no drug types there. And nobody really wanted to have us around to have booths or tables at their fairs or anything else. And then all of a sudden there was hemp. Hemp could save the planet. Hemp's good for the environment. Food, fiber, fuel, and fun, and medicine also. And that immediately we became welcome again and started doing all of these fairs, where, alongside the environmental booths, now we had hemp booths and marijuana booths. So that was really, really a valuable service. And The Emperor is certainly a very entertaining book, if not exactly accurate in all the details. The general story was really a good propaganda.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, how many events did we all pass out flyers that were all just direct pages out of The Emperor Wears No Clothes? I mean, en masse. I mean, we built tours around it in Cannes. I did 47 tours. All of them included a master sheet that had, 9 out of 10 of them were all direct copies out of Jack's books for people just to absorb because they were visually appealing, but the facts that went with them. And if you had ever had the joy to be around Jack when he was speaking prior to his stroke, he was very charismatic, bombastic, and knew how to command crowds quite well. So he was very effective in communicating at rallies because he came to my university, West Virginia University, in 1989, and that's how I first met Debbie and Jack, was them pontificating about hemp, and Debbie had a piece of hemp fiber, and I remember touching the fabric and my mind kind of being blown. And having those types of not only people discussing, but having visceral things for people to see, touch, feel, and of course take away, right? We wanted to take away those flyers and that they would talk with others or get lost in their laundry so that their parents would find it. It would spark a discussion. And this is how we grassroots change things. So I can't thank you enough for not only that. When you said Dennis, fond memories for me early on in Cannes was going to those CANORML nights at Dennis Peron's house, where we would sit there and assemble the flyers, or the newsletters, right? And Dennis would supply the weed, and we'd fold, stamp, and staple, and organize that. Some of my most fond memories of just grassroots activism was just sitting in a room with all y'all, making it happen, just sending it out old school. But that's what it took back then to arrive where time came and went. But Thank you again. Next up will be Peggy Jones with our next question. Councilmember Jones.
Hi, Dale. Thank you so much for joining us. My question is, looking back at when you worked on the first congressional report on climate change, would you say our eradication of cannabis has contributed to the negative effects on our ecosystem?
Well, I wish, but the climate change is a whole lot bigger than the cannabis issue. And cannabis actually in the main has a very small environmental impact. All of the cannabis in the United States that is at least consumed, the marijuana type that is consumed, the entire United States can be supplied by, maybe 20,000 acres or so is sufficient. And that's smaller than many, wheat farms that are out there. And I'm afraid there's the climate problem, I just to fill it in. Yeah, I worked for a year on a congressional fellowship where I organized hearings on what was the first congressional hearings on climate change and climate research. And, I called in witnesses and, copied their testimony and stuff like that and wrote a committee report on it. But at the time, this is 1976, none of us really had any clear idea why we should even be interested in climate in particular. It sort of looked like an answer looking for a question. But we called in these witnesses, and lo and behold, witness after witness started testifying to the effect that, well, if our models are correct, this carbon dioxide seems to be building up in the atmosphere as a result of man-made activity, human activity. It's been doing that since the 19th century. And if you continue this trend, it's going to get up to levels where we would probably have global warming, which won't be detectable, for another 15 years or so. But I was impressed by the evidence, and we really emphasized that in the report. And as a result of the report, the Congress funded some research, which lo and behold, found out, sure enough, about 15 years later, all of a sudden, just as these witnesses had predicted, there seemed to be some global warming occurring. And I thought that was probably one of the most accurate long-range weather report I had ever heard. And I'm still impressed what's been happening here in California and in the United States and the world. And since then has followed almost exactly the predictions that these scientists put before our committee back then. But unfortunately, there's nothing we can do to fix it with marijuana, one way or the other.
Thank you for that, Dale, and thank you for that important work as well. Next up will be Councilmember Michael Crowitz. Councilmember Crowitz.
Great to see y'all. Thanks for coming in and hanging out with us, Dale. This question, I wanted to try to tap into your insight a little bit. It's kind of funny. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the successful Prop 215, the first initiative that really kind of kicked it off at the state level, that started a revolution really of cannabis activism in the United States and around the world, if I'm not mistaken, was the 13th initiative. So it reminds me, it's funny, it reminds me of Melissa Etheridge, I think it was, that had been like touring for 25 years and then was just discovered. Just discovered, this new phenomenon that's been out there playing for all those years. But anyway, yeah, I just wanted to get your sort of insight going back through the years. The question, is of all the organizations and people that have come and gone, try to wax poetic a little bit about the three who may have been the most effective for the overall cannabis cause.
I think it's fairly clear, although I know organizations have been as effective as I guess they wish they were, but of course we've got NORML, and I already explained. I mean, they introduced the issue to the world. They started the rescheduling idea, petition, and they you know, CANORML, we were involved in Prop 215 and have been involved in other issues since. The decriminalization in California was sponsored by CANORML, by our lobbyist, Gordon Brownell, who pretty much single-handedly, with the help of George Moscone and Willie Brown, got that through the legislature. So there's 50 years there of work, which has amounted to a fair amount. I have to mention the Marijuana Policy Project, which was sort of a spin-off from NORML in the 90s, and which really got on the ball about doing other initiatives after we did California. MPP and Rob Campy in particular was a very effective fundraiser at getting the necessary millions of dollars together to put marijuana on the ballot in other states, medical marijuana, and you know, in Colorado, and was I think the next. Well, I can't even remember what the order was because it was Colorado, Oregon, Washington. There were a whole bunch of states. I know they were involved in the Missouri initiative that passed a couple years ago. So I think their efforts in that regard were very helpful. And the Drug Policy Alliance, or Linda Smith Center, whatever you want to call it, were also effective on the same front, especially since they had George Soros's money to work with there. Actually, they had George Soros, and MPP had Peter Lewis, who both had plenty of millions of dollars that they could actually put into this. NORML was never quite so effective at raising money, unfortunately, something that we are an issue we are trying to deal with right now, along with, I have to say, MPP and DPA and all the other drug reform organizations, because cash, there's not a lot of money here at the moment in the whole marijuana business. But yes.
Thank you for that, Dale. Next up will be Council Member Wade Laughter.
Yeah, thank you, Dale. I want to take the conversation in a slightly different direction here. Our next question is, what cannabis medicines today are most similar to cannabis pharmaceuticals that were on the shelf in pharmacies here in America back in 1915, for example? And what cannabis products today, if any, and I certainly have opinions on this, but I'm waiting to hear what you have to say. What products today, if any, would you classify as similar to the old time snake oil scam that was going on back those days? Thank you.
It would be interesting if it would be nice to know more about the medicines of 1915. There are people who have collected some of the old bottles of containers that had cannabis medicine. And in fact, I had such a bottle and tried to get it analyzed. There was a little bit of tar in it, like a booger's worth of tar left inside, black stuff. And I got it to a lab and they found it had traces of CBN in it, right? Breakdown product. So there had been some THC in there at one time, but it's impossible to gauge really anything else about it. However, I would say that tinctures would be what are most comparable. And because that was really the most popular way of marketing it on the pharmaceutical market in the United States. I've seen the ads. from the 1920s for these tincture bottles with a little rubber eyedropper on them. And some of them advertise dosages like, a couple of drops or something like that. So they must have been strong, some of them. So one thing I have no notion of was I know that hashish was also available. I have not seen any samples of the actual pharmaceutical hashish that would have been around. I don't know what it looked like. There are stories from the 1840s in France, the green hashish that the French hashishans, the artists used. The Bohemians took at that time, and they were like green candies that had I don't know, probably other flavorings in them, cinnamon and sugar and stuff like that. But I don't think that anybody has, to my knowledge, has recreated them or knows exactly what they were like. As for snake oil, well, one thing is that there's a lot of myths out there currently about cannabis. One of the things that have been skeptical about for some time are these topicals. There are a lot of topical preparations out there, and I've heard lots of firsthand testimony. Oh, this made my lesion go away, or this helped my arthritis. It's an old Mexican folk treatment for arthritis was to put cannabis leaves soaked in alcohol on your arm and so forth. But whenever I talk to scientists about it, they say, well, look, you just can't, THC doesn't go through the skin. It's a real problem. And I've talked to scientists who tried to patent a delivery system that would do that. And nobody, to my knowledge, has successfully demonstrated that. That's something that you can apply, and then a test later shows yes, somehow some THC or other cannabinoids got in their system. Now it could be that there are other components of cannabis, other oils, there's olivitol and things like this that coexist with it that may in fact be beneficial. And it's I'm not ruling anything out, but I sure don't see much there as far as the evidence. I mean, we've also got a lot of new cannabinoids that people, well, not new, but new cannabis products people are selling, like high CBG, cannabigerol or cannabichromene. And I haven't gotten any money to give me a clear explanation of what they think these things do, if anything at all, because they don't seem to have much in the way of noticeable effects. In that way, they sort of resemble CBD. Now, CBD has a bit of the snake oil about it, because at the dosages that is normally sold, it's really hard to say that it has any effects at all. The studies have shown CBD can be really helpful for certain kinds of epilepsy, for example. Dravet syndrome is the famous one for children, and for anxiety and things like this. But usually the dosages are in the order of hundreds of milligrams, and your standard CBD product, normally has like 10 milligrams or something like that, or 20, and it's not clear that they have any benefits at all, other than people placebo benefit. I have nothing against CBD. I think it's a safe thing. It's not clear that it's doing anything. Now, I am worried about the new synthetic cannabinoids that are being produced from hemp that have never been tested in human subjects. Some of these, like the THCO acetate, THCP, and THCB, and THCR, And some of these claim to be between 3 and 30 times as potent somehow than THC, Delta 9. And I don't think we want anything like that. Uh, uh, and certainly I wouldn't want to play around with anything like that if it's never been tested in human subjects, and these things haven't been. I mean, I want to distinguish them actually from Delta 8 has gotten a bit of a reputation for itself because it was one of the first of these to arise. Delta 8 does occur in minuscule quantities in pot, but actually Delta 8 has been around for quite a while, and there's been studies with it. It was investigated as an adjuvant for pediatric cannabis treatment, cancer treatment, nausea in children for being treated for cancer, and found to be effective actually in Israel. And amazingly, the first studies with CBD, humans with THC8, Delta 8 THC. Let me get things straight. Yes, the first studies of Delta 8 THC were done in the 1940s, before Delta 9 had been discovered. Delta 8 had been produced as sort of a side product of CBD, actually, which was discovered earlier than Delta 9. So I feel fairly good about Delta 8, and it's not stronger. It seems to be milder than Delta 9, but beware of the others.
There you go. All right. Thank you for that. Michael Crouch, you had a follow-up?
Yes, thanks, Dale. I just, first of all, I wanted to touch on the cannabis extracts. I thought that was a great comment, about us sort of having parity with our ancestors on the cannabis extracts and tinctures that we're using in medicine. Back then, they had they called it, I believe, cannabinol. And they did, of course, it was years before, you're talking the 1910, 15 time period. That was years before they discovered CBD or THC or anything like that. But they knew if they had that red extract, they had everything in there. That was their theory. That was the strongest extract that they get. And I really feel from my research that we have just basically, in the last 10 years or so, caught up to our ancestors on the quality of our extracts. But we're doing good. I think we're really good. What I think we need to catch up on now is how well our ancestors used those cannabis extracts together with other herbs, because each and every one of those products that they had 10 products for pain, and each one had a different herbal combination with a different strength of opiate. So you get a different herbal combination with morphine than you would with codeine, for example. And then as the reason why that motivated me to raise my hand at all was about hashish apothecaries, because that to me is a really interesting open question that I know you and I have never talked about. But Donnie has found, Don Wirtschafter, of course I'm talking about, with the Cannabis Museum, he's found some hashish apothecary jars, which look very authentic. They seem to be very authentic. And to my knowledge, I've never found any hashish product in any of the pharmaceutical brochures, the manufacturer price indexes and stuff of all the major, Mulfords and Park Davis and Lilly and all those of the day. So it's a really interesting question. There was hashish candy and there were hashish products that you could order in magazine, ads, but there didn't seem to be hashish apothecaries. So that's really, what I'm thinking is that there's two different things. Either somebody got very creative later and it's just a very modern thing after the exploration of hashish by our hippies, in the 60s or the 50s, or it could be a actual apothecary that was made by a very experimental, pharmacist that was actually getting hashish from the old world himself or herself and putting it in a big jar in their pharmacy back in 1890 or 19. So it's really, anyway, I just put that out there as an open question that I find fascinating about you're talking about hashish HASHEESH. That's the hashish candy, hashish with 2 E's, and then the hashish with HASHISH for the pharmaceutical. And then the German, which was the German version of that, which HASCHISCH, I think it was. This strange spelling that they had. But yeah, man, thanks so much for all your work on all this stuff and your insight. I know that question was designed specifically looking at the work that you've done on the history of cannabis and your work personally in your own doctorate on looking at the history of medicine.
All right, next up will be Marilyn Mathry. Councilmember Mathry.
Unmute. Okay. So Dale, it seems that California cannabis, after the end of the federal prohibition, will likely become one of the market leaders, as the case for California wine and produce now. Do you think, are California farmers aware of this, and is California working towards this eventuality, becoming the lead?
Well, that has always been the dream. And we have a whole lot of farmers who have always hoped that that would be the case. But as you're aware, they're having a real hard time competing in the current environment. The legacy growers, of course, famously grew in the Emerald Triangle, which does indeed have a very good climate for producing cannabis, as do many other places in the world. But the main reason they were up in the Emerald Triangle was that it was remote and forested, and you could hide from the authorities. And when you don't have to do that, and you can go down to Fresno, which also has a lot of, has a lot of free sunshine and good soil down there. It's possible that you can do as well. And then it's possible too that you can find other places outside of California. I'm fearful of the future actually for the California industry, partly because it is so regulated and expensive compared to some other states. Certainly if they legalized today, California would be behind, I think, because of its high taxes. It would have a hard time competing on the market. So that is one concern. And then, of course, the other concern is, as everybody says, well, if it's totally legalized under federal law, that opens the door to imports. And what's to stop Colombia or Jamaica from growing down? And of course, they're bound to have cheaper agricultural costs than we do. So I think it's going to, competition could be tough up ahead. Plus, we have these new technologies that are developing where they might be producing good cannabinoids from cultures of bacteria or yeast or something like that, and might have a really excellent product in another umpteen years. So at the moment, the legacy industry in California, though, is barely hanging on by a thread, I have to say, and is largely being displaced by corporations, both national and international, like from Canada, right? With lots and lots of money and not much history with this thing, but enough funds to be able to buy up other people's farms, buy up legacy farms, and do the business themselves. So I'm not happy with the direction things are headed at the moment, and there are powerful economic forces in the United States which work towards big agriculture, which I think we've all seen in our lifetimes. Because when I was a kid, the family farm was, everywhere. I mean, my grandparents had family farms, right? But no small families are doing that in the way they used to anymore. At best, they're multi-million-dollar family businesses, corporations, but with staffed mainly by, immigrant workers or something like that. Yeah, it's I'm not encouraged by the direction the industry is going in that regard, but I do think there will be plenty of good cannabis for people to smoke, and Californians should continue to be free to grow some for themselves too.
Yeah, I keep hoping with the environment the way it is that these states would give incentives for people to grow cannabis instead of the regulations with all the roadblocks, to actually give incentives, because the planet, I mean, I worry about all the fires you've had in California, I mean, plant trees, yay, but it's going to take a long time. So let's get some hemp or cannabis in the meantime to hold the soil.
Right.
Yes, soil remediation would be good. One of the many uses of hemp, as Jack taught us. Well, that's kind of that's it. That's our questions. So I want to thank Dale once again for joining us tonight. I'd like to thank our council members, Peggy Jones, Marilyn Mathry, Wade Laughter, Michael Crowitz, Nate Landau, myself, Etienne Fontan. Dale, again, I can't thank you for your hard work and dedication. Again, one of my most fond memories in life is when we were found guilty of in federal court, and we came out from the Ed Rosenthal trial after saying our Fifth and 10th Amendment rights, right? Fifth and 10th Amendment, right? And yeah, I to your smile when the doors open, we came out. I remember seeing you and Ellen and everybody, and just the smiles on your face was just the sheer joy in my heart, because one, I was found guilty of contempt of federal court by refusing to testify, but at the same time, that's the line that we had to take as activists to do the right thing, because we didn't want to see Ed go to jail for life, which they were going for a kingpin trial on him directly, which of course, if people aren't aware, if he was sentenced under the kingpin statute, he would have gotten life in prison. And the last thing we wanted to do was even though Ed can be an irritating son of a bitch, none of us wanted to see him do any more jail time. So I can't thank you again for your dedication and to patience, because I know I'm not the only person come out of a case and to see you smiling there. So to me and others, I just have to say my thanks. Michael Crowitz.
Yeah, I just wanted to take this opportunity to say thanks as well, Dale. Over the years, your support of many projects that we've worked on at the national, even international level was critical to our success. And if they did a movie about the cannabis movement in the United States, they'd have to focus on at least like Michigan, California, and New York. And the focus of the movie would have to be California. And with Stanley Mouse doing some of your artwork, and having Grateful Dead have fundraisers and shit, it's a colorful past that I think is only the more so by your involvement. I can't imagine without you that picture. You know what I mean? You're integral to that theme and that mosaic. So much love and thanks, man.
Well, thank you all. It's a pleasure hanging out with you folks, and I hope to see you in person actually someday here.
Absolutely. We look forward.
Yeah. Come on
Yeah.
out.
Cheers.
All right, everybody. Thank you very much. This has been our V.A.C. Roundtable number 63. Dale Gieringer. Y'all have a great one. Think he jumped.